Broadcasting under the night sky from the edge of an undisclosed jungle on the Gulf of Mexico, I'm Christopher Garetano, your voice in the night. For the next hour, allow me to be your guide into the bizarre unknown, the fantastic macabre, and together we'll journey to that borderland between fiction and reality, a place beyond all rational explanation. We are now off to the witch.
Now, you call yourself a satanic priest.
Yes.
Is that the opposite of God?
No, because Satan is a god too.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are you then, the dirty pope or what?
Oh, I guess you could call me that if you want to say the black pope or the dirty pope or the advocate of, for example, the kingdom of night or darkness. No one's ever come forth so far and spoken up for the devil.
That was a recording of the Joe Pine Show, an early TV hot seat forum that aired in 1970. Pine's guest was none other than Anton Zaharoff LaVey, the writer of the Satanic Bible, which was published just 1 year previous, as well as the sole creator of modern Satanism. To truly understand what Satanism is, you must know a little about Anton LaVey's life, his vintage sense of humor, and disarming personality. But first, what Satanism, as LaVey wrote it, isn't, is senseless murder, human and animal sacrifice, world destruction, censorship, loss of self and self-control, anti-individualism, herd mentality, and government totalitarianism. These misconceptions are associated with archaic fears, hinged to arcane horned symbols, religious and cinematic terrors, and all things evil.
Who or what is Satan to you?
Satan is the essence of that which dwells within myself.
Would you explicate this?
Satan is the pioneer, the inventor, Prometheus. Satan has always been the scapegoat, the other, as Thomas Saz, the psychiatrist, calls it. He has always been the opposition to what has been established at the time, the counterbalance that creates change, that creates evolution, that sets the climate socially for modification. Because without this so-called evil, there could be no change.
After his early chapters that included circus lion trainer, homicide crime scene photographer, and theater organ player, LaVey, whose intellect was rooted in the philosophy of Nietzsche, Sartre, as well as world history, theology, and classic literature, moved forward to scribe a tome that would epitomize his view of humankind. His aesthetic interests were of a wide range, from the masters of art to masters of magic, cinema, music, and theater. Anton Lavey created Satanism partially as an adversary to mass control. In his eyes, organized religion was in reality non-spiritual, a government-born hypocritical ruse using concepts of guilt and love to manipulate the masses. Ultimately, LaVey's purpose was to encourage the rebel, to be superior to the norm, the rebel who makes incredible achievements with their wicked art or profession, the ones who enjoy sensual pleasures as well as pleasures of the mind and spirit as they see fit without harming others, self-discipline without self-punishment, strength in the face of an enemy, and only love and kindness for those who've earned it. For many people, this credo is quite attractive, and for others they perceive it as selfishly malicious as the devil himself. The dark aesthetics and unity of rebellion that LaVey forged in 1969 is what has ultimately massed millions of followers over the years. Stay tuned, as tonight we're speaking with the grandson of Anton Lavey, who has lived an incredible life, literally and proverbially, in the house and family of Satan. I'll return after this commercial break.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
The Devil's Burn. An explosive film. Absolutely brilliant. ABC TV. Superbly, frighteningly effective. Time magazine.
But of course I can prove nothing. This Mother Superior may be little more than a hysterical nun.
Exactly. Mere conjecture.
And what form does this incubus take?
The Devils is not a film for everyone. Vanessa Redgrave, Oliver Reed, in Ken Russell's film of The Devils.
Welcome back to Off to the Witch. I'm your host, Christopher Garatano. Tonight's guest is not only linked to Anton Lavey by name and blood, but also personal philosophy, intellect, and interest. Stanton Lavey shares much in common with his grandfather, but enough of a difference to forge a new chapter in his satanic family legacy. So here's part 1 of 2, my interview with Stanton Lavey.
Well, my formative years were spent in the Black House at 6114 California Street, the infamous headquarters of the Church of Satan. And when I say my formative years, I mean from when I was born until I was 5 years old. And then after I was 5, my mother moved me away with her and my first stepfather, her first husband. But my formative years were wonderful. It was as magical as one might imagine them to be. My first memory is of being in a crib and looking out the back window, kind of just gazing out, and a cat jumped into the windowsill. And it was one of our family cats, I guess. My family has always kept a lot of pets, as the public may know. My grandfather was an animal lover, and my whole family have been animal fanatics, as am I. And interesting that you should ask, because right now we have about 10 cats ourselves, including a kitten who had kittens on our property that we're taking care of and keeping safe, and looking for homes for them, of course, and things like that. But my first memory was that of a cat jumping into the window. I think there was some music playing on the radio. It wasn't very nefarious. It was kind of a sweet memory. But my childhood was really wonderful in the Black House. I have no complaints. Everything was great up until I left with my mother. But I'm sure that some people out there will be able to relate to that. Our early years, when you're a baby, everything is goo goo gaga, and everybody's all happy about having a baby. When the baby starts growing up and having a personality of their own is when things start getting complicated.
When you left, did you feel like you were out of your element at that point? Like you left a place that you were born into, a place like the Black House. I was 5 and I wanted something like that because I lived vicariously through TV shows and movies and horror and special effects. But you were in it. It was right there in the core of it, the heart of it.
I definitely felt out of my element when I left, and I was never really back into my element again until I opened Odium when I was 23 on Sunset Strip, and I kind of built what would have been a library of sorts in the Black House if one had existed, and opened it to the public. And that was the first time I felt back in my element, and I've been kind of pursuing that lifestyle ever since, because I've always wanted to go back to my childhood. It was so wonderful and magical that I've longed for it my entire life. But my early years away from the Black House were filled with a lot of trouble with regard to abuse from my first stepfather, and kind of neglect from my mother after leaving the Black House, that is. And so it was a total shock to me to go from a really loving, supportive family, to one where I was very much outcast and not wanted around. My first stepfather came from a very conservative Chinese family, and didn't like at all the idea of his son dating a white girl who had a child from a previous relationship that was way out of their scope of acceptable, reasonable, normal. And so I was kind of I was hidden for a while, which was the exact opposite of when I was a little boy, going from being able to talk to my grandfather about really just about anything that came to mind and being encouraged to do so, to having to hide on weekends in my mother's car for fear of being caught by my stepfather's parents and things like that, because he tried to hide our existence from his family for a time until they eventually caught him harboring my mother and me, as it be. uh,
Wow.
yeah,
And so at that time, just like any kid would, if you had a fantastic grandfather, you wanted to be back with him.
yeah, that's all I could think about. That was all I wanted. I expressed as much too. I asked my mother all the time if we could just go back or if she could just drop me off, and no such luck. No, for whatever reason she wanted me with her. I guess maybe, who knows, for whatever reason, maybe I felt like an anchor to her or something that tied her back to the Black House and my grandfather, a connection that she wanted to keep, and or a token or something, memory from her time with her parents. Because as far as I can tell, my mother had a perfectly happy childhood with my grandparents and growing up in the spotlight when Satanism was really taking off, and the public was all for it. I mean, there were plenty of people who were disenfranchised with religion in the 60s and 70s to sort of um, gobble up everything that the press would write about Anton and his religion. So she didn't have a bad time of it. I don't really know why, if the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I really don't know why she left home at all. There really was no good reason for her to. She had her own room. She had everything she could possibly want. I guess probably just adolescence calling, that sort of call to be your own and stand on your own 2 feet and not live in the shadow of, must have played a part of it. So that's all I can really say about that.
But you carry your grandfather with you every day. He's inside of you. He's in your
Yeah,
DNA. And
very much so.
so outside of the impression that was made and a great life up until the time you were 5, uh, you know, th- you're still drawn to it every day, no? I mean, and ever since then.
Well, I mean, you really can't run from this kind of legacy. It's not something that you can easily run or hide from. I kind of attempted to for a time in my early 20s. I lived the straight and narrow life of the workaday world, and I excelled in it quite rapidly, and I could have done quite well for myself had I stuck around and continued working in corporate America. But it didn't speak to my spirit, and it wasn't natural for me. It's not what felt like I was being true to myself. And how much money you make a week or a month is not a measurement of your own personal success in this world. Um, and I'm sure anybody with or without money can relate to that. It's Success is something that's very highly individualized and very specific to each person, and it's based in what what your passion is and what your calling in life is. And I've always been drawn to movies and entertainment, and so moving to Hollywood was a natural progression for me. I moved to Hollywood and lived in LA for a time when I was a kid with my mother, after she had left my first stepfather, and she hooked up with my second stepfather, Nicholas Shreck, who some of your listeners may know of. Um, things got better for a time. And then there were ups and downs. Things were better, and then things got worse, and things got better, and things got worse, until finally things got better, and then they just kind of got better and better and better.
Were you able to reconnect with your grandfather at any point?
Yes, I was, thankfully. So when I was almost 18 years old, and my grandmother suggested I write him. This is after many years with my mother and my two stepfathers. Eventually, my grandmother took over my care in my teens, from when I was 15 to 18, because raising a teenager just didn't mix with Xena and Nicholas's lifestyle choices, and so my grandmother opted to take over my care. It just made sense for everyone. Um, and I was perfectly happy with that. My grandmother was awesome. She was great to live with and a wonderful teacher, and she really helped like transition me into adulthood. I would say, um, where in ways that Xena and Nicholas just, I don't think, it's not that they couldn't have. I just don't think they were at that point in their lives inclined to want to teach a teenager stuff about how to be an adult or pay bills and things, mundane stuff that they really weren't interested in. Um, but at some point in time, when I was 17, my grandmother suggested that I write my grandfather a Halloween card, which I thought was a great idea. That I hadn't seen or spoken to him in 4 or 5 years at this point. Um, and he immediately wrote me back and was thrilled to hear from me, and instantly invited me back to the Black House to visit with him. And I spent all night long visiting with him on many occasions, at least once a month during the last year of his life. So we got to really reconnect and spend a lot of wonderful hours talking and joking and watching movies and palling around, doing the type of stuff that I did with him when I was a little kid, but with the perspective of a young adult, which made it all the more enjoyable.
Sure. So you were born into it, and you didn't really know anything different. And then when you were pulled out of that, it was a complete and total culture shock, correct? Like when you step out of there and you're around other people or your new stepfather, it was like, wow, what is this
Things did
place?
not make sense at all. Um, it was it was nightmarish, really. I mean, disturbing in that David Lynch kind of way, where it was like, this can't be my reality. Like, what the hell is going on here? So yeah, very much so. It was extremely uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable to the point that it manifested in me. I guess a case of what you would call today post-traumatic stress disorder, which only agitated things insofar as my mother's ability to raise me well, because she was so young when she had me. My mother, for your listeners, in case they don't know, my mother was only 13 when she became pregnant with me, and this isn't something um, that was broadcast in the media. It was not something my family was particularly proud of, although they reluctantly went along with my mother's desire to keep me rather than abort or give me up for adoption. She was insistent on keeping her baby, which, in retrospect, I'm certainly glad that she was she was sentimental like that and did keep me, because I shudder to think what my reality might be like had it been spent any other way than it has. I'm very happy with my life and my existence, and I'm very lucky. I'm one of a very fortunate few of children, who are kind of like celebrated children, if you will, that has made it out somewhat okay. I mean, I've got some rough edges, but for the most part, I'm all right. I like to think so, at least. Um, we all like to think that we're all right.
Nobody's
um,
perfect. We've all been through it.
exactly. Yeah. Um,
But I've that natural, inherent kinship that you had with your grandpa. It's like so many of us out here feel that when we read about him,
Yeah,
and
yeah. Of course, they feel a closeness with him because of how deep his philosophy runs through other people, and naturally so. And so he's kind of. I joke with people. I say, "Well, Anton is kind of all of our grandpa." In a way, all of us who at least ascribe to his way of living, his philosophy. He's kind of the grandfather to he's the father of Satanism and the grandfather of all Satanists. And so I understand and I identify with Satanists who see in me a sort of a remnant or um, you know. The the remains of Anton still lingering on Earth today. I'm his kind of his shadow figure in a way, left here as an ambassador to the legacy, and whether I like it or not. So I'm doing with it what I can, and it's a difficult legacy to operate with because on the one hand, of course, I'm not interested in outdoing Anton, and I don't really aspire to outdo him, but I do enjoy working with the history. And so I work with writers and I work with film producers and different people when developing characters for Anton and developing ideas based on and around Anton as the key figure and things like that. And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to be called on to work on things and to be interviewed by journalists and to put together different people for articles and interviews. Like, for instance, there is a story coming up soon in a popular magazine that is about the friendship between Anton Lavey and Sammy Davis Jr. And I was able to help put together a lot of the people who were interviewed for that story and connect them with the writer. And things like that are a lot of fun to be able to do that. And I'm sure that my grandfather would be happy to know that I've taken the reins of and responsibility of doing that because I think a lot of other people might not do it as as well as I may. So
I agree. And I think most people, and you just mentioned Sammy Davis Jr., most people that knew your grandfather felt that connection philosophically and also that he was a fun guy to be around. And I think obviously there's so many people out of fear that have this misconception. And an other odd thing, and this is not going to be smack talk because I really just want to know your story, but you have other facets of Satanism that have the audacity to sit and talk negatively about him. And it
yeah,
just doesn't make any sense.
no, it doesn't. And back to the first part of what you just mentioned, his humor and being, kind of afraid of him. It's funny you should mention that because when I first went back to visit him on my first visit, I'll never forget this. It was incredibly funny. Uh, he he met me at he didn't meet me at the door. I was in the parlor, the purple room, waiting for him, and he came in from the kitchen, and he gave this reflexive grin, this big grin, smiling at me, and in his mouth were a brand new set of bright white teeth, and I wasn't expecting this at all because the grandpa that I remembered at the time had really bad teeth and very few left of them. And I guess while he was in the hospital, because he had died a year before we were reunited, and this is a fact. It's where he wrote about it in the Cloven Hoof. There's an article where he writes about having died 2 years before he actually eventually did die, and that he was resuscitated. And he talks about how there's nothing on the other side, but he wrote this article before he and I were reconnected because when we got back together, well, let me just finish telling this story. He grins at me, and I thought that he was wearing a pair of fake gag teeth, like a pair of trick teeth, like fake dentures to as a joke, like
Right.
kind of like as a whoopee cushion type joke. and because he was really fond of those types of pranks and pranking with people, and so I thought it was a prank, and I just started laughing and laughing, and he didn't know what I was laughing about. And it wasn't, there was a moment where it wasn't funny all of a sudden. And I said, Grandpa, your teeth. And he said, oh, these things. Yeah, they outfitted me with them when I was in the hospital. And he had totally forgotten that he was wearing them. I guess he had gotten used to wearing them. And I was laughing my head off because I thought he was pranking me. And it was one of those moments where it was there was this silent moment for a second during which I was realizing that he wasn't pranking me, and he was realizing how funny it must have looked. And we both had this really awkward moment there for a second that was funny because we were both sharing in the awkwardness of it. And then we both started laughing when we both realized why it was awkward and what was funny about all of it. And that was kind of our first meeting back together, and the very first time that we met again face to face after many years of not seeing each other. It was definitely an icebreaker.
Sure. And you felt like you were home finally for the
Yeah,
first time
yeah.
in how many
It
years?
was wonderful. 5 years or more. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. For a kid, 5 years is a long time. I mean, when you think about it, when you're only 17 years old, 5 years is a third of your life. So for me at the time, that was a really, really long time. As an adult, if you say 5 years, I haven't seen someone in 5 years, it might not feel like so long, but when you're a kid, it really makes a difference. Um, some of the movies that I watched with him, that's a good question. I was so wrapped up in things. I think we watched Freaks, and he told me the story about how he helped to recover Freaks from being a lost film. I don't know if any of your listeners are aware of that, but Anton was instrumental in Freaks not being a lost movie, that it was on the brink of being lost, and there were only like something like one or two prints of it left remaining in existence, and Anton managed to secure a print from the original producer or someone like that.
Wow.
And he had been put to task uh, by um, by a film archive society, one or another of these archive societies, and they funded him going and sort of like a detective searching out for an available print of Freaks so that it could be put to VHS and then later on DVD, because for a time it went missing. People don't know this. There's a lot of great films that exist today that were considered for a long time missing films.
So I've read some of the suggestions that your grandpa said in terms of movies and like Freaks. Obviously, I did not know he was involved in the revival of it or the salvaging of it. Did when you were back there finally, you felt like you were home. He and I have a strong feeling that he lived his personal philosophy, believed in everything he said. He lived
Yeah,
that way.
very much so.
You went back there with a bit of a different perspective because you were removed from your natural environment, which was the
Yeah,
Black House.
yeah, and I went much farther away from the Black House than I've even talked about yet on your podcast. But I mean, I lived around the world in the time that I hadn't seen Anton. I had moved to Vienna, Austria, with Nicholas and Zena, and had some really rough times there when they conveniently stopped wanting to raise me when we were on the other side of the world in a foreign country. And and that led to all kinds of major problems in my life, that led to me effectively being homeless in Vienna, Austria, and having to sort of fight to survive, which was, I mean, I felt like, is this some sort of a game show? It was very surreal. And eventually I made my way back to the States, and with their help they did cooperate with my grandmother, and they worked together to get me back to the United States. But Zena and Nicholas left me in Vienna, Austria, and moved back to the US without me, to illustrate how detached we were when I was 14. By the time I was 14 years old, and this is after a couple of years of really, really bad times for me.
If you don't mind me asking, what philosophy were they practicing at that time? Was it anything nearly like Satanism?
I think that they thought that they were. I think that at least the selfish factor in how they were being played into Satanism to a degree I think that they took the ball and ran with it when it came to selfishness, though, and I think that a lot of their ideology at the time that had to do with neo-Nazism and things like that really was in great conflict with things that I was into when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I liked rap music and I liked skateboarding and all of the stuff that culturally skinheads just are naturally opposed to. And in Europe, even more so, it's like if you embody any of these types of attitudes, then you're a number one target for skinheads, which was bizarre for me coming from the United States, where uh, a year before moving to Vienna, Austria, I was spending Easters with the Metzger family, that is the infamous white, infamous uh, Aryan resistance, the that started the White Aryan resistance, and who the main guy had a television show called Race or Reason, Tom Metzger, and and whose kids were on the Geraldo Rivera show when Geraldo's nose was broken. I don't know if you remember that back in the
I
80s.
do.
Yeah. Well, these are the people who I was spending Easters with, sort of chumming it up with these crazy radical neo-Nazis. And then I moved to Europe and I get kicked out by my parents, in part for who I was associating with in Vienna, which was a mixture of kids, that some of whom had ran away from home, some of whom were like punk rockers. There were black kids, there were Asian kids, all sorts of different types. And I was friends with all kinds of different people, as I always have been. And, and I mean, in Europe, in Vienna, for being this way, for being white and friendly with a mixture of kids, I, the it resulted in me getting beat up severely by a gang of skinhead like hooligans that had just left a soccer game, and they were all fired up and they beat up me and my friend really really good, and they got us good. And of course it didn't help my friend, when we were leaving the train station, a couple blocks from the train station, my friend yelled back, skinhead hooligan punks or something like that, or, fuck off skinheads or something like that. And I turned to my friend, I said, what are you thinking? These guys are going to come for us for sure. Sure enough, a couple blocks away, they did. And I think my friend learned his lesson that night. I sure learned one that I didn't need to. I learned a valuable lesson. Don't hang out with people with big mouths.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
There are things in heaven and on earth beyond the comprehension of man. Call them what you will. The occult, witchcraft.
Satan! Behold thy supplicants!
Devil worship.
Arise and come in, child. Enter for yet another lifetime in the Brotherhood of Satan.
So some power, something, has prevented anybody from getting in or out of Hillsborough for the last 3 days. 26 people slaughtered in a little over 72 hours. 6 families wiped out. All those kids missing.
A story of contemporary family witchcraft in California.
Witches. Black artisans, celebrants of the Black Mass. Each missing child was in a specific age group from 6 to 9.
Come in, children.
My baby! My baby!
Not your baby, our baby, Satan's baby!
The Black Mass, the blood sacrifice, the unholy ritual. It's all here, as a coven of witches holds California town in the grip of terror.
Satan, help us!
So Zena and Nicholas were going through a very transitional phase in their life. They wanted to they were aiming for the success of their Radio Werewolf band, which had more and more sort of right wing connotations running throughout it, and it became more and more sort of Hitler inspired as time went on. It went from being kind of this like goth pop band that Radio Werewolf was back in the 80s, to being this sort of neo-Nazi band that it became in the 90s when Xena was added to it and they moved to Europe. And I mean, they were so confused. This is when Xena was in her 20s and Nicholas in his 30s. They were so confused at the time that they actually believed that launching their new album in the birthplace of Hitler would bring them fame and fortune. They were so confused. They actually thought that Hitler might be celebrated in his birthplace, which couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, Hitler is the biggest villain ever in Europe, and Vienna and Austria in particular. I mean, he's considered the biggest villain in history, and he couldn't be hated anywhere more than in his birthplace. So this just goes to show how confused Xena and Nicholas were at the time. So, I can't, at this point in time, thinking back and looking back at how confused they were with reality in general, it's difficult to fault them too much with how they, with the things that they did with regards to me when in my childhood. These people weren't thinking with their thinking caps on. So, I mean, had they been, I'm sure a lot of things would have been different. I don't think that they would have. I think they would have chosen one or the other. They would have either chosen to secretly admire Hitler and not express it in their music, and move to Vienna, Austria, and just try to have do their goth rock thing in Vienna, or not move to Vienna, Austria, and stick it out with their neo-Nazi shtick in Southern California, where they had neo-Nazi friends that could show up to their shows and cheer them on. I think they were trying to have their cake and eat it too, and it just wasn't happening for them, as it doesn't for so many people.
And they've even distanced themselves from that particular point of view as well, correct?
Yeah, they have since then. Of course, who wouldn't? At some point in time. I mean, they were aiming to be like shock rockers, I think, and I think that they took it a little too far in one direction instead of balancing it out, and and then in came Marilyn Manson kind of to steal the show, which he did. And I can't imagine that Nicholas and Zena are not disenchanted by uh, all of their supposed hard work in trying to become these shock rock sensations with neo-Nazi themes and stuff like that, and it all going to waste while all of it got put to use with finesse by Manson and people like him. Not to rub their noses in it, but I mean it's a simple fact that Marilyn Manson took and borrowed from all kinds of people and put together a really lucrative career out of it.
Sure, and that's also somebody who met your grandfather.
He came up under Anton in a lot of ways. He was very much inspired by and influenced by Anton. Yeah, more so than he makes out to be the case these days.
Yeah, it's weird, and to even distance yourself from that experience. I know he wrote about it in his book and supported what was it, Satan Speaks, and but regardless of that, you go through this traumatic experience in Germany and Austria, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you come back and you reconnect with your grandfather after that.
Yeah.
And it's a total return back to where you feel you always needed to be.
And, I mean, it was like nothing had changed at the Black House. Everything was the same as when I left it, and I felt like, why did I have to leave? Why was it necessary for me to have ever left? I could have been here this whole time. No one would have even noticed me. I would have been upstairs in my room studying, and that would have been the end of it. And it's a real shame. I wish that had been the case. I wish that they had just left me at Anton's. They could have left me on his doorstep. And I would have been just fine. But I guess evidently there's certain things in life that the only way to learn are the hard ways, and as my godfather Richard Lamparski says, the thicker the scar tissue, the stronger it heals, or something like that.
Sure.
And so I guess there's something to that.
But you did have the return, and you did reconnect with him.
I did reconnect, and it was wonderful. And I was able to bring on one occasion I brought my high school girlfriend over to meet him, and who he just loved, because she was kind of like voluptuous strawberry blonde, and she wore a mini skirt to meet him, and he just thought that was terrific. And he even goosed her as we were leaving when she went down to give him a hug. Um, he gave her a goose right in front of me, and he gave me a wink. He winked his eye over her shoulder at me.
He was the best.
Yeah. He was
I'm
great.
sure it was intoxicating stepping back in there, though. Like all senses lit up the minute you walked in.
Yeah, I get the smell of the house and of my grandfather, and of being close to him, and just and hearing him play music, and becoming acquainted with his pets and with his new son Xerxes, who I got to meet and spend time with when he was a little boy. It was all just it was just totally magical, and I felt like Xerxes was very much kind of born in my spirit. Like, it was almost as though Anton felt like a loss in the house of my not being present, and had Xerxes kind of in my honor, if you will. And we didn't discuss that point blank, but he gave me that feeling, definitely. And he even went as far as to say that he felt that the reason that he didn't die the first time around was so that he and I would be able to reconnect this way.
That's
And
amazing.
as fate had it, a year after we reconnected, he did die. And it was just it didn't come as a shock when he died, because we knew that the time was coming. But it was just so incredible that the way the timing worked out, that I was able to spend the time that I did with him during that last year of his life. I mean, I wouldn't trade it for anything. So
No, it was destiny, and so that return, it must have forged some kind of future perspective.
yeah, I think it did. We discussed, we discussed the possibility of me eventually taking over the church, which he was interested in. He thought that idea had legs that, he wanted to discuss more. We didn't have the opportunity to, unfortunately, because he died quite suddenly. And but there was discussion of it, and it made me think seriously about the possibility of at least um, honoring his legacy by working with the legacy and having and dealing with it. Never did I ever imagine that I was going to eventually, because at this point in my life, when I was 18, you have to understand, my mother had I had collected a lot of wonderful things in my short life as a child and teenager that my mother took from me to quote unquote keep safe while we were in Europe. I never knew that keeping it safe meant her stealing everything that I had collected, which is exactly what she did. And I had to pick up the pieces and start all over collecting things. Um, After she was out of the picture and she had given me over completely to my grandmother to raise. My grandmother eventually adopted me legally, and my grandmother is still in the picture now. She's still with us, and I speak with her regularly. She was interviewed for the Sammy Davis Jr. and Anton story, um, and but
Does your grandmother still follow the general philosophy that your grandfather laid
to
out?
a degree, she's uh, older and wiser, and now, and I think less inclined to to be as against the grain as she might have been, or she was when she was younger. And so, and she's become more political minded, I guess you might say, and less sort of less philosophical minded. But we still get along quite well, and but never did I ever imagine that I was going to eventually collect and amass what appears to be the largest LaVey collection of artwork and documents and photographs and film works. The collection that I have now is unrivaled, and it's what I've been working with for the past several years. A lot of it came from my grandmother, interestingly, and then um, because my grandmother, for the 25 years that she was with Anton, quietly collected photographs and artwork, that stuff that would have gone by way of the trash possibly had she not collected it. Um, we're talking like the bulk of his drawings that he just doodles, and things like the cover of the Cloven Hoof that he drew, and the first uh, the first drawing that was the way he envisioned the Church of Satan membership cards to look. Um, all of this stuff, I have all of it, and so we're finally working on putting together we're looking at a couple different options. It's either we're going to make it all a coffee table book right away, or we're going to make it a zine for a period of time, and then eventually everything that's in the zine plus a bunch more will go into a coffee table book. There's a friend of mine who, his name is Ryan, and he owns a museum called Graveface, and it's in Savannah, Georgia, and now he's opening a location in Chicago, and we're going to be exhibiting most of my collection at those two locations.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, so people interested in seeing the collection will be able to visit it in Chicago and Savannah when they're traveling around and vacationing and stuff like that.
So going back for a second, and if you don't mind me taking you back there,
No, please.
you have this wonderful reconnection with your grandfather.
Yeah, it was great. We had a lot of fun. Yeah. We played music together. He brought me down to the Den of Iniquity. He opened the ritual chamber for me. It hadn't been opened in years, and he opened it just for me to go in and spend time in it. We spent time together in it, and then he left me alone in it for me to spend time alone in the ritual chamber, which was wonderful.
What was that experience like?
Like nothing else. It haunts my dreams to this day. It just incredible. To be alone in the ritual chamber in the Church of Satan is is certainly one of the great highlights of my life. Being in it with Anton was amazing, but being in it alone and being allowed to just go about and look at things and sort of soak in the magic of the room was just amazing.
And so the next chapter after that is that Anton left the earth.
Yes.
Left a
Yeah.
lot behind, but he left. What was it like, if you don't mind me asking, at that time overall, what was happening after he passed?
Well, I mean, it was a little frustrating. I learned about his death on the 6 o'clock news on TV instead of from my family, which kind of set the tone for things to come. I thought foolishly that my family would include me in being involved in carrying his legacy on, and but there was so much infighting between Carla and Blanche as to who would carry on the name the Church of Satan, that I was left out completely. My mother Zena had assured me that any part of the estate that she might inherit would go my way, would go to me, that is, that she didn't want any part of it. Of course, when he died and dollar signs were attached to it, that completely changed. And I didn't have anything in writing from her. And so, that was that. The way the estate was split, because Anton didn't leave a will, was it was settled three ways, where Blanche Barton took the title of the Church of Satan, and she got that for Xerxes, when he was a child, and so he couldn't carry anything himself as a child, so she carried the name of the Church of Satan for him. And from what I understand, Xena took the majority of the royalties for the books, and Carla took the majority of Anton's personal belongings. So Carla got all of the figures from the Den of Iniquity. She got his cars. She got his clothing, jewelry, his scowl and horns and swords and weapons and all of that fun stuff. Which I don't know how much of that she still has to this day. That would make a wonderful exhibit itself if she has it. And I hopefully my exhibit will inspire her to do something similar, because the more the merrier, right? Um, but but Xena has the reason people haven't heard much from Xena over the years, and she hasn't done much with her name and legacy, is because she receives a monthly check and doesn't really have to do much. So she gets the majority of the royalties for the books, uh, and um, and Blanche negotiated the turning over of the Church of Satan to Peter Gilmore and his wife long before Xerxes was of legal age, as far as I know. And I don't know how that works or why that is legal to do, because as far as I knew, it was that the church was being left to her for Xerxes, and that Xerxes would take over eventually, which is something I rather thought would be an interesting way for things to go. Um, I mean, at least it would be staying in the family, and he certainly is Anton's heir. But nothing has ever come of that, and I don't really know why. I haven't had any contact with Xerxes since he was very little. Um, I'll say again here, I've said this before, but I'll say it again just for the record and to be on the safe side. If Xerxes ever wants to reach out to me, I encourage him to do so. I would love more than anything to have a relationship with him, and hopefully a good one, or at least a friendly one. and that I'm here for him if he ever needs someone to talk to about having grown up in this crazy situation that we grew up in.
Have you since then approached the church that is now in Poughkeepsie, New York, since then?
Yes, one time when I was in my early 20s, I was living in Los Angeles, and I was quite popular at the time. I was doing a lot of magazine and newspaper interviews, and it was when I was dating my now ex Zandora, and we were receiving a lot of interview requests and things like that, and I thought that it would make sense for me to sort of infuse the Church of Satan with some life's blood by maybe starting a Church of Satan youth group or something, or heading something like that up. And so I approached Peter Gilmore with an email saying, "Hey, this is Stanton, and I've been thinking about, well, what would you think about me heading up a youth group for the Church of Satan, or something like that? Maybe I can help. Maybe I can help bring things around so that people view the Church of Satan as something a little more cool than they're starting to view it as, because." I mean, word on the street was Peter Gilmore took over the Church of Satan, and then things started to really go to hell. And nobody was finding it fun anymore. And so I was like, I didn't, without saying exactly that, I just sort of offered my services and said, I'd love to help if there's any way I can, and his attitude was, well, why would you think we need any help from you? You're not even a member of the Church of Satan. Go away, basically. And
Wow.
yeah, and so that was that. And I've never spoken to him again since, at least not without knowing that I was speaking with him. Um, and I don't have any interest in working with him after that type of an exchange. There's really that leaves no room for negotiation. So that's that. And he wrote me back very quickly. He didn't take long to think about it.
Yeah, and his connection with your grandfather should have, out of respect, should have had the conversation with you. But here's the other thing, and obviously you've thought about this thousands of times. You have the liberty and ability to go and carry on the legacy yourself.
Yeah, I don't need anyone's permission. I'm Stanton LaVey, and I have my own history and my own story, and my name is automatically trademarked, as all of our names are, by ourselves, by us having them as our names, and no one can take that away from me, which is nice. I'm sure that much to the chagrin of some of those who wish that that wasn't my name. I'm sure plenty of people wish that Anton had named me, Joe Bob LaVey, but he didn't. And I'm grateful to him that he didn't.
No, and in his last days, he gave you that blessing, so to speak. If you could say something to me to lead us out of and lead me into my outro for part one, what would you say as closing the chapter on that past relationship with Anton, reaching out to Peter Gilmore, all of that? Because now I'm going to start with a major question for part two. So if you could just give me a little story on the way out.
I guess there came a time not too long after my grandfather died, when I started shaving my head, and I had my bookstore boutique art gallery Odium in Los Angeles when I was around 23, that I started realizing that more and more I was becoming my grandfather, and that that more than just carrying on in his shadow, or carrying his legacy, that I was actually carrying on as an extension of him. And his friends were more and more often beginning to look at me like I was a ghost. And I was getting this eerie sort of vibe from a lot of people who had known Anton, that they were kind of reacting similarly to each other, and it was almost as though they they had this sense that Anton had beat them at the game of life, that somehow he had outlived all of them, and that now he was younger than they were, when they were just kids admiring him a short time ago. And that's really that's the gist of that's the direction that my adulthood went from there.
Welcome back to Off to the Witch. I'm your host, Christopher Garatano, and I want to thank you for joining Stanton and I for the conversation. I suspect many of you might feel differently about the LaVey family after these chapters, or perhaps not. Join us next week for the second part of my conversation with Stanton Lavey, as we talk about the new horizon of his legacy. I enjoyed spending the night with you all, and I look forward to next time. Until then, try to enjoy the daylight. Broadcasting under the night sky from the edge of an undisclosed jungle on the Gulf of Mexico, I'm Christopher Garatano, your voice in the night. For the next hour, allow me to be your guide into the bizarre unknown, the fantastic macabre, and together we'll journey to that borderland between fiction and reality, a place beyond all rational explanation. We are now off to the witch.
Satan can take the form of a beautiful woman. Satan can take the form of a sleek animal. An automobile can be very satanic. These things can be anthropomorphized into Satan. But I can assure you, Satanism is here to stay.
That was an interview with Anton Zaharoff LaVey, the creator of modern Satanism, explaining through a metaphoric combination of morbid style, dark aesthetics, attraction and sensuality, what he believed physically embodied the satanic essence. For LaVey, even though his definitions echo elder writings of forbidden temptations and fallen souls, his Church of Satan doesn't support damnation for your sins, weakness and misunderstood guilt, but on the contrary, responsible indulgence for what you desire, learning from your mistakes to become stronger, and intelligence over stupidity, which is the greatest sin.
Well, when I was a teenager, I was interested in the occult. And the occult in those days meant you got dream books and you got books on fortune telling and all that sort of thing. And the closest thing there was to anything about calling up spirits or demons and that sort of thing was a lot of gobbledygook where you stood around in a circle and you used the protective names of Jehovah and Jesus and all that. And I tried it. Oh, Lord knows I tried it, but it didn't work. And so I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to call up any demons, if I'm going to get any magical power, if I'm going to get anything going my way, I better get on the side of those guys instead of protecting myself from them.
The devil in LaVey's world seems a far cry from the hell-bound entity that vomited green bile while a possessed 12-year-old Reagan McNeil fought for her soul in William Friedkin's 1973 motion picture, The Exorcist. That's not to say Satanism doesn't welcome the dark, macabre, and mysterious. It's a celebration of all of the above, including the odd, arcane, and the occult. There is, however, an undeniable element of the supernatural. Regardless of some peripheral Satanists being self-proclaimed atheists, Anton Lavey believed in some other plane or dimensional existence. He believed in consequential magic and malleable energy. Tonight, we'll learn more about it as we continue with part 2 of my interview with Stanton Lavey. Stay tuned and I'll return after this commercial break.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
Mark of the Devil, the desecration of human mammals less than 300 years ago.
It's your sacred duty to tell us the truth. Confess that you've been guilty of witchcraft.
Tortures pitting human appendages against the strength of cold, brutal steel. The rack, the claw, the tongs, devices that made death a welcomed pleasure. Every torture device authentic, actually used at one time. Mark of the Devil, positively the most horrifying film ever made, guaranteed to upset your stomach. This city is now being flooded with stomach distress bags. No one will be allowed in the theater auditorium without these free bags, also available at the theater box office. Mark of the Devil, all ages admitted, parental guidance suggested.
Welcome back to Off to the Witch. I'm your host, Christopher Garitano, and tonight continues my conversation with Stanton Lavey. Last week, we discussed his life, being born in the infamous Black House and living as grandson literally to the Church of Satan. There's so much more to this story, so here's part 2, the conclusion of my interview with Stanton Lavey. And I wanted to ask, after dealing with Gilmore over at the church and feeling the way you did probably at the time, did you speak to your grandmother about the future?
Yes, I did. That's a really good question. It's difficult because my grandmother, similar to my grandfather, my grandfather alluded to a possibility of me having, involvement in representing the church as time went on, but I was still quite young even then, at least to be like a public spokesperson. I was barely 18. And my grandmother's take on things was more like what my grandfather's was when I was a little boy, which when I was very young, my grandfather imparted on me these words of wisdom that I'm going to share with you now, which was that what he wanted for me was for me to be my own man, develop my own philosophy and based on my own take on life, and to not necessarily follow in his hoof prints, as it be. And he said that if he could have it his way, that I wouldn't bother with the direction he's taken things at all, and instead build my own empire based on my own interests and take on things, like I said, and that I do things my way. And I took that to heart. In my adult life, I would like to say, expanded on his ideas rather than just being led by them. I've taken to heart everything that he put forward, but then I've taken things even farther, where things like for instance, I'm a vegan, and I'm very against animal abuse, cruelty to animals, anything that is exploiting animals. I'm extremely against it. Where Anton said very specifically to not harm animals unless it's for your food. I take things one step further and say that they don't need to be our food, and that eating them is really just another form of harming them. And but really, as I grew up and became an adult, and learning my grandfather's philosophy, there wasn't too much in it that I could find myself disagreeing with, especially having grown up in it. So he made it a difficult task before me to develop my own philosophy when his was as airtight as it was. Uh, and I think he recognized that in 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 the interim, during the time between when I had last seen him and when I saw him again. I think that he realized that the advice he gave me was advice that would be difficult for me to pursue, but yet my grandmother held more to that side of things, where she wanted to see me live my life without any of the satanic uh, elements being embodied. She wanted me to, what my grandmother's always wanted for me is to lead a very straight and narrow life, with as little turbulence and disruption and, uh, and mystery involved as possible. But for me, that sounds like an anticlimactic way of existing, and it doesn't sound fun at all. And I'm all about living life to the fullest for the funnest.
And I think your grandfather did too, large in part, and that's what he's left with you because he made that impression on.
That's why I say my grandmother's current philosophy is not quite the same as it was when she was with him. Now, bear in mind, she was with him and representing the philosophy for 25 years. Doing anything for 25 years eventually becomes tiresome, no matter what it is. Granted, it's difficult to say, well, if it's your calling and if it's your passion and if it's what you really feel you're put on earth for, then it doesn't become tiring. And there's truth to that as well. So, how much of it was Diane just going along with Anton and his whims, if you'd call it that, from her perspective, it's hard to say. I know that the current modern Church of Satan, one of their disqualifying elements or angles where I'm concerned is that I was raised in part by Diane and in part by Xena, two people whom the Church of Satan recognizes as defectors to the church. And so, because of that, I'm automatically a defector in their eyes. Um, and I guess to an extent, or in a way, I am a bit of a defector. I'm a defector of the current day Church of Satan. I don't agree with a lot of what I've learned are their practices with regard to how their membership and the privacy of their members is concerned. I've learned from firsthand experiences from people who have either been excommunicated from the church, which is something that really wasn't done much of when I was a kid. Growing up, you didn't hear about members of the church being excommunicated. There was a rift in 1975 between what became the Temple of Set and its members, that took a number of Church of Satan members along with them when they broke away from the church. But beyond that, there wasn't much of a change in things. Things stayed relatively the same the duration from the beginning of the church till the end of my grandfather's life. It was when he died that things really began to take changes.
And how do you feel about, uh, you know, a different incarnation of it regarding the Temple of Satan with
Um,
Lucian Graves and people like that?
I would be more for it if they were more outspoken in a positive sense about Anton. If they were to say, hey, we wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the hard work and brilliant mind of Anton Lavey, then I would say, okay, well, then whatever they're about, as long as it's not hurting anybody, I'm all for it. But the fact that they downplay Anton's existence and the role that he had in as the founding father of modern Satanism. I mean, it states clearly, I think, if I'm not mistaken, at least it did for a time on their website, that they do not believe in anything Anton put forward. Although then you turn the page and there is a list uh, of of 9 statements that are based entirely on the statements in the Satanic Bible, and with very little uh, change or adaptation to anything new. It's basically, at least in its philosophy, is completely plagiarized from Anton. And I say plagiarized because they don't give credit where it's due. They try to take credit away from Anton. So on that note, they kind of disqualify themselves to me, um, just on that principle alone.
So I have 2 questions that are going to lead me into the heart of this episode, this second episode. Question 1 would be, and I know it's speculation, but if Anton was here, what do you think he would say about where Peter Gilmore has taken everything and where the Temple of Satan is, or would he not even care?
I don't think any of it would have happened if he were alive. I don't believe that Peter Gilmore would have been placed in the position that he's in by Anton personally. Um, Peter Gilmore was not in the running of people that Anton had selected and offered the title of high priest to, which he did. He went to a handful of different potential recruits to the high priesthood that all, it was kind of a unanimous decision amongst them to turn it down, because no one wanted to try to fill his shoes and fail at doing so, and B, these are people who were living were living the satanic life according to the principles that Anton had put forward, and they were leaders in their own right, of their own following, and with fans and with a philosophy of their own, and doing what Anton suggested even to me when I was little that I do. And so for them, it would have been taking a step backwards to in life to try to uh, rekindle the Church of Satan after Anton's passing. Um, so, but Peter Gilmore was not ever offered the priesthood by Anton. I don't how that was negotiated between him and Blanche Barton is questionable at best. I'm sure that it had to do with money, um, as most everything in life seems to boil down to. Um, and I think Anton would look at the Satanic Temple as just another, blatant wannabe group of wannabes, an offshoot of the Church of Satan that is for people who are, for as far as Anton would be concerned, people that really wouldn't qualify as members of the Church of Satan might go by way of something like the Satanic Temple.
So, all of the above has created, and I'm sure you thought of this, the perfect storm for you now to go and do what your grandfather told you to do.
Yeah. That's basically what I've been working on, mostly, is writing down philosophical ideas and not presenting them publicly, at least not yet. I'm still working on it, and but there definitely seems to be room for improvement, and there's definitely room to lead, because I think that there is a lack of leadership that is pronounced, um, and at least a lack of leadership that's taken seriously or that takes itself seriously. Uh, And in the case of Peter Gilmore, I think in some ways he might take himself a little too seriously. There's a lack of humor and a lack of sort of charm and charisma that uh, that is necessary for that to play that role publicly.
Yeah,
And
your grandfather was hilarious. He had such an incredibly intelligent sense of humor.
yeah, he was very advanced, and he was a world-class conversationalist. He the type of person who could carry on a conversation with the likes of, people I'm sure these days, like the Minister Farrakhan, or any given president, or however he could really hold his own when it came to talking and being heard and being listened to, and it was in no small part owing to his wonderful sense of humor, and his many other talents as an artist and musician. He really captivated people. It was hard to not fall for Anton's charms, which is how Anton attracted the likes of Sammy Davis Jr. and Jane Mansfield and Marilyn Manson, and these people that for a period of time at least were quite outspoken in their dealings with and association with Anton. It was Jane Mansfield's publicists and handlers, and Sammy Davis Jr.'s sort of entourage and handlers that that were the ones who discouraged them from wearing their Baphomet sigil, which they would proudly wear otherwise, and the photo shoots that with Jane Mansfield that were for so long believed to be just a one-off publicity stunt have since been proven to not be a one-off publicity stunt, but rather Jane Mansfield was in close contact with Anton during the last 2 years of her life throughout, and would regularly call him in the middle of the night with questions and sort of to seek advice from him, like a person would from a personal psychiatrist or otherwise. He he was kind of her guru during the last 2 years of her life. Um, there's room to believe that there was more going on than just a professional relationship. I mean, Jane was, despite being every man's type, she was very much Anton's personal type. Uh, and the photos of her with Anton, that are in the book California Infernal, show a intimacy between them that none of the other photos that were released in newspapers ever did. Um, but I have some of these magazines that go back to the late '60s and early '70s that make Anton out to be the cause of her death, and he despised that type of publicity. I mean, of course, on the one hand, it kept his name in the public's mind, but not in any way that Anton was accepting of. He didn't like to be blamed for her death at all. He didn't feel responsible for her death. He warned her to stay away from her boyfriend after he had cursed him, and she told him that she would stay away from him, but she didn't, and the
He
rest is
had a
history.
strong belief in the mystic too, and that's and again, there's reason for that. I think intelligent people do believe in that possibility, and you can't just dismiss it. There's so many credible people throughout human history that have had experiences with it. I don't believe it's entirely scientific just to dismiss it. So, how do you feel about it? About the mystic?
I'm very much a believer in the mystic and the metaphysical aspects of reality. I've had far too many of what one might call supernatural experiences that defy scientific reality, at least in terms of what is commonly believed, and there's no way to unexperience these things. I'm not going to go into them right now. I don't think this is the time for them, but just one example, because it ties into my relationship with Anton. My first major experience with the spirit realm was when I was a little boy. I think I was maybe 4 years old. Um, I couldn't sleep. I was having a difficult time sleeping, and I had just managed to fall asleep when the door to my bedroom swung open, and in the doorway was a figure, a large male figure with a wide-brimmed hat, filling up the bulk of the doorway, a silhouetted figure, and it just wavered there. It didn't move forward or back, and it just stood there wavering with the light from the dim light from the hallway behind it, and there was no mistaking it for what it was. I could make it out very clearly, and I was wide awake, and it startled me to the point that I fell off my bed, and I asked it what it wanted. I asked it who it was, and it wouldn't answer. And then I demanded that it go away, and it closed my door. And immediately upon my door closing, there was an earthquake, a large enough earthquake that it woke my family up. And my grandmother came running to my room from across the hallway where I had seen this thing, and my mother from around the corner, and my grandfather even came up the steps to check on us. And this is what signified to me that it wasn't my grandfather standing in the doorway, which was my first sort of skeptical approach to it, that it might have been my grandfather. Of course, when the earthquake happened, I immediately knew that it wasn't my grandfather. And then when Anton began coming up the steps, I knew for certain that it hadn't been Anton. Um, and I approached Anton about it the next day, and he didn't have an explanation for it, and I could tell that he was frustrated with the fact that he didn't have an explanation for it. Um, he said that it must have been something that was meant just for me to experience alone, and that this apparition must have been signaling something, or it meant something symbolically, um, that was for me to understand and me alone. And but it but the earthquake did happen, and it happened immediately when my door was closed. Um, and that's not something that I take lightly. That's a serious experience. Um, and I've had other experiences that parallel it in ways where it ties into reality in such a way that it can't be refuted, and with witnesses, you know, even more so when there's been times when I've experienced things with people present to witness things happening. There's no getting away from it, or denying it.
Agreed. There have been so many strong experiences, including myself. I've had a few, and it's not to an excessive point. And there's, like, once again, that was a great story. There's so many credible people throughout history that are telling the truth. So many through
Yeah.
human history. And when I hear someone say, "Well, I'm an agnostic. I don't believe in anything after this." Well, maybe so, but there's something else going on here.
Yeah,
Multidimensional
there is.
existences, something.
Yeah, there is.
So,
There's definitely a lot more going. There's so much more going on than meets the eye. That's a fact. Anybody that thinks or says otherwise is lying to themselves, and they're doing a masterful job of shutting themselves out of the real reality of what's going on. I have a pretty strong belief in there not being free will as we perceive free will. I don't believe in free will. I think uh, that control over any situation is an illusion, and that situations and experiences and encounters, they play out the way they're meant to play out, or the way they're destined to play out, and that there isn't really anything a person can do to change them or alter the outcome. uh, I think that we're on a fixed track of some kind, um, both personally, and historically, physically, metaphysically, and otherwise. And so people who talk about free will like it's something that's real, or that use the word coincidence, I know when I'm speaking to someone that calls something a coincidence that they really don't get it, because there's no such thing as coincidence. There are synchronicities, there are parallels, but there are no coincidences.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
Somewhere between science and superstition, there is another world, a world of darkness. Nobody expected it. Nobody believed it. And nothing could stop it. The one hope. The only hope. The Exorcist. Warner Brothers presents William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist. The Exorcist, directed by William Friedkin. The Exorcist, rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent.
So listening to you, and then listening to what your grandfather suggested about taking things in your own direction, you seem to have a very profound perspective of your own, coupled with the things he left in you, that he taught you, that you experienced with him. It seems to me, and that you're a very intelligent guy, that it's powerful enough to inform another tome and another perspective of philosophy. And the fact that you understand the fact that he was a performer and an entertainer all together with everything else, as you are, and you're interested in the aesthetics and the fun of it. Once again, and I'm sure you're aware,
It needs to go into a book.
Right. Are you in any way afraid of the power that's going to have going forward? Because in a sense, it very well could stamp out facets of these other two churches and temples doing their thing. You could literally blast through that and take over in a very short period of time.
Yeah, and I'm an all right writer when it comes to just writing. I've practiced writing for quite a long time, and I've done some short story writing that has been online and has been really well received. So I'm not at all afraid of writing. I'm not intimidated by the writing process. It's just a matter of at this point editing and compiling and doing copy editing and things like that. I've got a lot written already, and certainly enough for a book or two. And I'll probably go the route of self-publishing at this point in the game. It just seems to make the most sense. I was close friends with Michael Aquino during the last 10 years of his life, and he was a major spokesperson for self-publishing, and he has most of his works are self-published through Amazon and do quite well.
I am all for it. I'm a huge advocate for independent publishing, and if you can get things out directly to the people. And in your case, you have a built-in audience. That audience will just appear.
Number one, I would like to involve the helping of and saving of animals in need. I think that there needs to be a positive outlet for Satanism, so that Satanists are not just viewed as people who don't sacrifice animals and people, but rather viewed as people who save animals and people. And I think that there needs to be a built-in plan for an infrastructure or something where members of the new order, if you will, would be actively involved in helping animals and rehabilitating people too, because there's always room for advancement in rehabilitation, both for people and animals. I can speak for myself when I say that I've had times in my life that were hard times that I really would have benefited from the kind of rehabilitation that I really don't see existing these days yet. I think there's a lot of room for improvement in regard to how human suffering and animal suffering is treated, and I think those would be two major aspects, or one major aspect split into two different treatments that I think that Satanism really needs to start going, and instead of a lot of this sort of superficial nonsense about transgendered this, or and marriage rights, etc., and things that the Satanic Temple is up in arms about, I think are kind of childish, and I don't think it's really doing much good to really actually help people, and more than just people, animals who don't have the ability to speak for themselves and who don't have a voice and who deserve the same rights, if not better, than humans deserve, are just being exploited shamelessly. And it needs to come to an immediate stop, not a gradual stop. It needs to be outlawed instantly. I'm vehemently against the terrible mistreatment of animals and farming them as livestock and everything. But beyond that, I think that Anton put forth some great ideas where satanic sins are concerned, and I think that we need to, as Satanists, explore these sins and make sure that we're not falling victim to them ourselves.
I'm imagining the effect, and it's exactly what I think he suggested you to do. You're doing it.
I see a world of people who subscribe to a philosophy that is supposed to embody certain behaviors that it's not fully it's not as well rounded and full fledged as it should be. I think that these people who call themselves Satanists really need to, they need to set up shop themselves and do things for the communities that they live in, so that we can set the tone for a satanic age wherein people take Satanists seriously as active members of a community, where they are going out into the community and making a difference in the community. And I think that would alone change the landscape of Satanism and the way it's perceived generally. And I don't. I personally would like to avoid being political as much as possible. There's a lot in politics that goes on that, of course, it's one thing to have a position. It's another thing to challenge or rally against or for different positions, because it becomes then too political minded and not based in philosophy and lifestyle. And I think that if people were to just adapt a lifestyle where, instead of so much time spent uh, frittering time away senselessly, either online or video gaming or whatever people are doing these days, um, and wasting money senselessly on uh, pointless shopping and buying stuff that is really just, that are novelties and gimmicks anyway. and especially gimmicks that are just being regurgitated all of the time. But instead, take their backyard and dedicate it to taking in a number of animals per year, and working together with myself on creating a network of people that are rescuing animals, and ideally, hopefully, rescuing some worthwhile people along the way too, because there are plenty of people out there that just they don't have um, a vision or a goal or something, a passion in life, and what happens is they get swept away into the life of addiction and things like that. I think that Satanists should be active in trying to put together um, recovery homes and recovery centers for people who have fallen into addiction and drugs and crime and things like that. I think that there's a lot of room for Satanists to help rehabilitate people who have managed to get free from prison and who might have been imprisoned for crimes that are petty, or that are drug related, or that do not have a or that are what considered victimless crimes. Prisons are overflowing with people that are guilty of victimless crimes. That's something that needs to be um, demanded change. I think that um, I think that drugs and a lot of these other things that are victimless should be decriminalized. I think that it would alleviate a lot of the pressure and strain of overcrowding in prisons. And these people have given direction. I think that if they were to be shown that there are ways to have passions in life that go far beyond the selfish pursuit and the self-destructive pursuit of using drugs and things like that, that they might find themselves more interested in going out and rescuing people and animals from situations, and of course, determining what person or people or animals should deserve to be rescued. I think all animals deserve a fair chance. People, on the other hand, I think a system of approach should be developed that would weed out people that are determined to be homeless or determined to be druggies, and look for people who really want a way out. I've spoken with many Satanists over the years that during times that they've been homeless, and done the best I could to give them advice to try to help them um, find and receive uh, assistance in ways that they might not have otherwise thought to do, and to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and start taking life and themselves more seriously. And it's had an impact on people that I've encountered, and I think that more Satanists should look at themselves as possible leaders to inspire other people, and not just limit themselves to associating with people that are of the upper echelons, so to speak.
Sure. Listening to you, it seems like the natural progression of what was originally written, in my opinion, because the love for animals was born out of your grandfather's love for animals.
Yeah. I've suffered with drug addiction myself, and so it's something that's personal to me to want to help addicts out of the situations that they get themselves into, and so that's part more in line with my own personal philosophy, and venturing away from, yeah, but still people are animals too, and they don't know what they're doing sometimes.
Right. Right. And one of the things that attracted me to the satanic philosophy was that self discipline and the choice that your grandfather had said. It's your choice. Be responsible. Like don't be stupid. In a
Yep.
way, I'm paraphrasing, but
Yeah.
and in your case, you're saying that, but you're reaching out to people who may have made a mistake to bring them back to that discipline.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'd like to see more of.
I'm curious as to how long you want to give yourself before you you deliver this new book, this thing that you're going to put out, and the movement you're going to create with it, because it's such a positive thing. It's almost like and again, like I'm not trying to start a war with these guys, but I don't feel like they're Satanists, and because
Yeah.
Satanism was created by your grandfather, and
Yeah.
it's different.
No, I'm saying individuals need to work together and individually to, in cooperation with an organization that is satanic inspired, and to really make changes and make a difference in the world. It needs to happen. There are far too many able-bodied and intelligent Satanists sitting on their laurels, so to speak, doing really nothing. That their lives could be put to better use, serving the community, and they would find a sense of purpose in doing so that I think that they wouldn't be able to find doing anything else.
Would you open up a location or locations eventually?
Yeah, yeah. We're already discussing starting a animal sanctuary and basing a network of people from that sanctuary. We've already began taking in animals, and we're looking at land right now. And I'm discussing opening a nonprofit to serve animals, so that we can establish sanctuaries, at least statewide in California, to house animals that are at risk of being killed in shelters, because it's a serious thing. Pets that are loved when they're kittens and puppies, and then put out to die by people. This is something that happens just all of the time, and then getting picked up by places like the Humane Society, whose idea of humane is, when it's overcrowded, they put the animals to sleep. And by putting them to sleep, I mean murdering them. And this needs to be stopped. People need to be educated on not on overbreeding, and the problem of overbreeding and not getting animals fixed. There's a lot of education and outreach that needs to happen to get people to understand to not buy kittens and puppies if all you want is a kitten or a puppy. And that animals, they grow up and they become older and less playful, and they just want a home where they're loved and they're kept safe. And that's what needs to be provided for animals. I think that outreach should happen in elementary school for kids. I think that that would be one great place to start. Would be for activists to start going to elementary schools to teaching about what it means to have a pet, because that's where the problems oftentimes start, is kids begging their parents to let them have a puppy or a kitten, and then the cycle continues, the cycle of abuse and neglect, and ultimately of animals being born for the purpose of being mistreated and then eventually killed. It needs to come to a permanent stop, and people need to really recognize this is a real problem, and that it's a problem spiritually, because people see it going on. They drive past roadkill and they don't think twice about it. People are desensitized to seeing, packs of homeless cats or dogs in places, and they turn a blind eye and they don't think twice about it. And what's happening is, as the result of it, is, for so long people have driven past these areas where there are packs of wild cats and dogs that have banded together, because they're stronger in a group than they are individually, and they know that the same is happening with people, and with people driving past homeless encampments and seeing these people, and just turning a blind eye and saying, oh, it's a problem that's beyond repair, and there's nothing that I can do to help fix it. And that's just simply not true. There are people who work actively all the time, and who dedicate their lives to trying to fix these problems. And the more people that dedicate themselves to fixing these problems instead of just turning a blind eye, the sooner these problems can get fixed. And they are real problems. Los Angeles being overrun with homeless people is a real problem, and it's a problem that I have witnessed firsthand. I've been to Los Angeles. I've driven through LA. I know how much of it is occupied by tents and the homeless, and it is it is like something out of a horror movie. It's not. It's inconceivable. It's gone from being contained to Skid Row to most of downtown Los Angeles and the eastern sections of LA, like east of Hollywood, towards downtown. It is all homeless. It's overrun with homeless, and to the point where now they're talking about having to dedicate, build and dedicate entire buildings and rebuild basically project housing. And we're back to square one when we know exactly what project housing does. It encourages the same criminal mentality and activity that led to the homelessness in the first place and led to the overcrowding of prisons in the first place. So, it's people are thinking in cyclical terms when they're not thinking in finite, coming to, finite solutions in finite terms. They're looking at it as this just, infinite recycling of the same ideas that don't work, and implementing them when the changes that need to happen from uh, within these communities of homeless animals and homeless people. It's like we need to infuse them with social workers that are there all of the time, trying to, basically trying to preach and talk out of doing drugs for a better cause, and getting homeless people to work for other homeless people, and getting a cycle of homeless people advocating to get homeless people off the streets and working and rehabilitated, or whatever it is that they need in order to get them functioning in society like a normal person. And instead of so many thousands and thousands of homeless people, encouraging just the opposite in teenagers, while teenagers are taking the bus to school every day and busing past, cities upon cities of city blocks filled with tents. Well, of course, what are we teaching our youth? We're teaching them that it's acceptable to live that way, and that society will allow it, and it needs to not be allowed. Society needs to stop allowing it. And I mean, if drugs are going to be considered criminal, then homelessness should be considered criminal. I don't think special buildings need to be built for them. I think that people need to either accept rehabilitation or accept institution, one or the other. And it's like you either go to jail or you go to rehab, or you go into vocational training and you clean yourself up and you pick yourself up by your bootstraps and get back to work and stop screwing around.
See, there's so many misconceptions. As people who just don't know anything about the philosophies that are currently available, and especially this one, which is the most unique and very uniquely you. These two core things, but also are aligned with a lot of the strengths of Satanism, and I'm sure there'll be many other things too in your book.
I'd like to release something within the next year,
That's amazing.
realistically. Yeah.
What do you, if you don't mind me asking it, if you don't have to reveal it, but what would you call this new incarnation?
I'm not quite sure yet. I don't. I think that that's going to come to me when the time comes. In the meantime, what we are doing is we are working on the first ever Satanic Encyclopedia, and for me, what that's doing is it's opening my eyes to Satanism throughout history and all of the subtleties and words and meanings and people and places and events uh, that are what have culminated into and become what we know as Satanism today. And so it's while putting this together that I'm piecing together things that I've already written and writing more um, on my vision of Satanism, at least. Um, whether it be the New Order or however or whatever the title is, I'm not sure. But it definitely something that I'm called to writing. But in the meantime, I just figured it would be important to mention that we are actively working on an official encyclopedia of the Satanic, which is something that's never been done.
It seems like you're You are approaching this in the best possible conceivable way. And, I'm not sitting here being a yes man. I'm speaking from my own perspective of listening to you. If I felt like you were lagging off, I wouldn't be saying these things.
No, I want to understand Satanism as fully and completely as I can before presenting something to the world, because I don't want it to be just thrown together, and I also don't want to later on realize, oh, I would have found myself inspired by this or that if I had only known. So I'm basically doing a lot of studying that I I have up until now, I've been living my life just for fun, really. Um, and it's only until the past couple of years that I've started to settle down a bit. I had some health problems a couple of years ago that were pretty severe, and it brought my mortality to light, and it made me realize, hey, you might be operating on a certain amount of time here. You better get busy working on some projects that are near and dear to you before you run out of time. And so that's what I'm finally doing now. Um, so it's apropos that you should mention these things there. These are things that I'm actively working on. But first and foremost, I'm putting together these two exhibits of my collection because I'd like them to be on display. And of course, I'd also like to be making money from them existing and not just sitting in boxes or, on display for myself to see in my home. That gets boring quick. I'd rather share it with the world, and so we've managed to come up with a solution for that with the Grave Face Museum exhibits. So I'm putting those together currently while working on the encyclopedia, and it's while working on the encyclopedia that I'll be writing my first great uh, entry into the Satanic lexicon, as it be.
Yeah, because as soon as that's launched, that the it's going to be taken a lot of it's going a lot of people are going to take to it a lot, and I'm
Yeah.
sure you're these things go through your mind. Do you ever feel the presence of Anton while you're working on these things? I mean, in your subconscious, conscious, in your dreams, do you ever see him?
In my subconscious, in my dreams, and in my chromosomal existence, he's present in every way possible. I mean, up until I'm 44 now. It wasn't until I think I was about 39 that I started wanting to live for not just for myself and for the fun of living, but living to share my experiences and wanting to put pen to paper and actually produce something that might be um, a help to other Satanists wanting to advance their place in life and in reality and do more than just be a selfish person, which a lot of Satanism can be interpreted as sort of promoting selfishness in a grand sort of way. And it's like, how grandiose can you make your selfishness? And I think that a hard right or left turn, as it be, needs to be made before we before our greed eclipses our rational thought or rational mind. And I think that that's really what I'm hoping to do, if anything, upon writing a book and putting it out to the world. There's also my life story that I don't want to go without publishing, because I think that there are people who will be able to relate to some of the things that I've been through. And I think it's important for people to see that somebody who has been through some of the things that I've been through can make it out alive, and not just alive, but can make it out alive and thriving, and and uh, and that there is sort of a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, when it comes to um, a life of hard knocks.
There is an enormous future. see it. I can see, the probability becomes very clear, my friend. What was it? Alejandro Jodorowsky, he said, at 40, your age, I'm 46 this summer, but he said at 44, he was coming into life. He's now in his 90s.
Yeah.
So that's how I feel too.
I very much feel like I'm just now becoming a man, a grown man, and I'm ready to start to take on some of the things that are in my destiny to work on. I just don't feel that I was prepared mentally, emotionally, or in any other way really up until recently to begin some of these undertakings.
What I usually do at the end of every episode is that, and again, whatever answer is right, so don't worry about it. But I ask if you, when you're ready and you're conscious, when you leave this physical realm, what would you take with you?
I would probably say all of the love that I've experienced. And all of the love that I have, the love that I have for those who I love, and the love that I've received from those who love me is definitely what I would put in my suitcase.
Welcome back to Off to the Witch. I'm your host, Christopher Garitano, and I want to thank you for joining us. I've always found the stories of Anton Lavey's legacy to be interesting, and I will most likely revisit this subject again. I think a motion picture biography on Lavey is long overdue. Next week, I return to the mystery of Montauk for a look into the explorers of the Camp Hero Enigma and a tribute to the life and legend of Paul Fagan. Until then, try to enjoy the daylight.